For 24/7 FDV counselling and support, you can contact 1800-RESPECT on 1800 737 732. LGBTIQA+ specialist FDV support is also available through the Rainbow Sexual Domestic and Family Violence Helpline on 1800 497 212. In Western Australia, you can contact the Pride and Respect Specialist FDV Support Service on 0481 080 201. Support links are included in the show notes.
Welcome to the Pride and Respect podcast, where we discuss the difficult topic of family, domestic, sexual and intimate partner violence within LGBTIQA+ communities. Every episode, we bring you genuine stories of lived experience and share empowering insights and advice from our sector specialists. I'm your host, Dr Jack Farrugia, a researcher in the Youth Mental Health team at the Kids Research Institute Australia. I bring both research expertise and lived experience as somebody who is LGBTIQA+ and has previously experienced intimate partner violence. Thanks for being here with me today. So in today's episode, we discuss LGBTQA+ young people's experiences growing up and their unique experiences with family violence and intimate partner violence. In today's episode, we use the term queer to refer to LGBTIQA+ young people. We recognise that this term does have a complex history and we aren't using it today to cause offence, and we do recognise that it may not resonate with some people. Join with me today. We have two incredible sector experts who I'm very excited to speak with. So first, we have Marcus Roberts. So Marcus is the Principal Counsellor in WAAC's Freedoms Counselling program. So Marcus supports LGBTQA+ young people all throughout WA. And his previous work has included working with young people and adults and victims and perpetrators of violence and abuse. Thanks for being here with me, Marcus.
Thank you for having me here.
And we also have Dani Wright-Toussaint. So Dani is the Youth Services Manager for the mental health programs at the Perth Inner City Youth Services. Dani supports LGBTQA+ young people who have experienced family and intimate partner violence. Thank you for being here, Dani.
Thanks for having me.
Great. All right, so to start off, I'm keen to hear from both of you about why you were keen to take part in the podcast today. Dani, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I just think it's exciting that this podcast exists, that we're opening up these kind of conversations, because it is something that gets really missed both in the service landscape for people experiencing family and intimate partner violence, but also I think in the LGBTIQA+ communities, it's something that maybe we don't always want to face and talk about openly, and it needs to be discussed.
Yeah. And it is really hard to have these sorts of conversations around the way that violence and abuse, what that looks like for LGBTQI+ people. So excited that you're both here to be doing that with us today. Marcus, why were you keen to take part?
Yeah, I just think working with young people and just recognising that life stage of youth is a very challenging one to navigate, because you're trying to make your way from childhood into adulthood and figure out what that means and what's expected of you. And that's a very difficult thing to do. And that's difficult for all young people, but then particularly for LGBT young people, there's not often a lot of resources or models that they can turn to help them navigate. And especially navigate those challenges that are specific to LGBT experiences. So I think getting the chance to participate in this podcast and help add an additional resource for queer young people would be, really wonderful.
Yeah. Keen to know as well a bit about, what family violence actually looks like, in the home for LGBTQA+ people, particularly when it comes to, gender and sexuality. Dani, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I mean, examples that we commonly see, unfortunately, are kicking people out of home or not allowing them to do any gender-affirming care, healthcare or other things that are going to affirm someone's gender within their family environment. So that obviously is detrimental to people's trans young people's mental health and can really break down those relationships and compromise their welfare and safety.
Yeah.
That's definitely the first one that comes to my mind, because it's something we are grappling with all the time, and that's literally why our services exist, to provide transitional housing for young people who are going through those sorts of things. But it can look. Control over medication is another one. So even if somebody has obtained it, then controlling whether or not they can take that, or threatening to do that. The financial means to be able to access gender-affirming care is another factor that parents have control over and may be withholding access to in that way, which is obviously all intertwined. I have certain people in mind that is at the forefront of my mind that is informing my answer right now. But I don't know if you've got more that you can add, Marcus, while I keep thinking.
And it's one of those questions to answer. You do really have to keep thinking through it, because it's just so complex. So when we talk about violence, like obviously physical violence would be a very clear depiction of that. But if we're understanding violence is like within relationships as intimate partner violence or family domestic violence, then we have to understand violence as part of a range of strategies to maintain power and control over a person. Again, this gets difficult to understand clearly. When it reaches its extremes, it's very, very obvious, but more often than not, it doesn't exist at the extremes because it would make it obvious. Like, power and control is often maintained by it not being clear that that's what's actually going on.
Yeah.
And the difficulty at this life stage is that the role of family and parent carer has often required you to, up until this point in their life, maintain a position of power and control. If you were to if your 5-year-old was to say, "I've had enough of this, I'm leaving the house," and storms out the door at midnight, like that'd be a problem. Anybody who would find that young person would turn to the parent and carer and say, "You're not doing enough to care for them, stop them walking out the door." But at some point, that's no longer an appropriate or healthy or respectful thing to do. Like, as adults, you can make your own decisions. So where is this point at which taking control over decisions for someone stops being caring, supportive parenting and starts actually being abusive and harmful? All I'm just trying to highlight is, for young people experiencing it, there's reasons why it may not be obvious to you. And in some cases, for people perpetrating it, is reasons why it may not be clear to you. It doesn't change the impact of what it means for the person being subjected to it.
Yeah.
So it can be difficult to identify. I think the other thing we need to understand about power and control and abusive behaviours is that the person perpetrating that harm is using the tactic that works. This is why sometimes people say, "Oh, why did they keep putting up with that? I would just leave." Like, well, if you would just leave, they wouldn't have used that strategy. Okay, they would use the strategy that's going to work for you. And whether those strategies are like financial control or isolating you from friends and family, sort of monopolizing all of your time, it's very easy to do those things in a way that not only does it not look like abuse, but it actually looks like the opposite. But I just love you so much. I
want what's best for you.
Yeah, I just want what's best for you. I don't think those friends are a good influence on you. I just want to hang out with you all the time. Like, I miss you when you go. That sounds and looks like love.
Yeah.
And it's hard to sort of just give this black and white checklist that you go, well, if that's there, ultimately that is abusive. But yeah, absolutely, that does sit somewhere between abusive and unhealthy. And I suppose a good indicator of whether or not your relationship is safe and healthy is what comes next when you speak to that.
Yeah.
That if you raise it and go, "Hey, that's probably not the best, I know you miss me when I go, but it's actually really important to me to have friends because I need more supports. I love these people as well. I deserve to have fun and have time." If the person goes, "Oh yeah, actually that was a really bad way of expressing it sorry,
Yeah.
and it doesn't happen again,
Yeah.
that's a pretty good indicator that someone's gone, oh, yeah, you're right, that I can correct that way of speaking. Let's take that out of our relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But if you raise something like that and you're made to feel like you're the person causing harm, how dare you say that about me?
Don't you love me?
Yeah, you're made to feel bad about yourself.
Yeah.
And you ultimately don't get to hang out with your friends, then that's an indication that, okay, actually this is probably something a bit more substantial and significant. I should be a bit cautious that this might not be a healthy relationship to be in.
I mean, for young people, no matter, regardless of, sexuality or gender identity, you learn boundaries in relationships and how to be in healthy relationships, ideally during your adolescent years, right? But for a lot of LGBTQIA plus young people, that just isn't possible because for a lot of people, it isn't safe to come out. There might not be other queer people in your social circles or at school or whatnot. So you sort of look to, the parental figures or adults in your life or other friends who are going through relationships to sort of learn what relationships sort of look like. If those relationships that you have been around in have been, possibly violent or abusive in nature, or if you have been in an abusive situation with parents or guardians, there's just all those things compound to not lead to conducive, healthy relationships as a queer adult. And so when do you learn what healthy relationships look like? And unfortunately, it's just learning by practice. And if that other person has gone through similar things or might be more prone to being a perpetrator of violence, it's just a whole big mess of things that aren't leading to positive outcomes in that relationship.
I keep thinking about we often in that process of coming out or figuring out who we are and then maybe coming out, we have to be social chameleons, and almost some of those habits can almost make us vulnerable to having to do that within a relationship to maybe comply or would make us vulnerable to sort of some of those power over dynamics that can be quite damaging and abusive. So I just think there's that element of vulnerability that we experience as queer people and growing up queer that kind of almost could make us more like in the habit of dynamics that might lend itself to being vulnerable to those sorts of power and control dynamics.
And just the inherent part of that experience of growing up as an LGBT young person is confronting that the norm is not you and you are not the norm.
Yeah.
But even in households that are accepting and fully embracing of those identities, you're still in the position of having to navigate. There's something different about what I'm dealing with compared to what is normal.
Yeah.
And by normal, I just mean the majority of the population and what is presented as being normal. And that means that raises questions for how do you make sense of yourself? What should your life look like? What should you expect of the world? It means you have to invest a lot of time in trying to educate yourself, because the answers that might just be existing around the ideas that float around us in the people, schools, families, that float around us, those answers might not be there for you in making sense of your experience.
Like all young people, you learn. Wait, I'm not a young person anymore. But we did, you learn from the people that you see in your life, role models or people you consider to be, sort of more in that sort of authority sort of positioning. And as a LGBTQA plus young person, if you don't have anyone in the family or any close friends or role models, you look to the media and representations on TV. And, I think things are, getting a little bit better now in terms of representation. There's more stories out there. Young people have much more access to positive LGBTQA plus representations and relationship representations in the media.
Everything you've just said about improvements in representation in recent years is true, but just for the sake of this conversation we're having, I think it's worth noting there is a somewhat peculiar experience happening for young people at the moment where they're experiencing homophobia and discrimination while simultaneously being told this is no longer an issue, which is quite a confusing experience for people.
Even with the increased acceptance, there's also increased retaliation against that, ramping up the homophobia and transphobia to almost counter an increased acceptance and visibility as well. So it's so much more complicated than, it's better than it used to be, you know?
Yeah.
And the added complexity to that being that because of that increased social acceptance and support within families, that young people are now coming out younger. So they're now coming out kind of more around 10 years old, where previously, while it isn't necessarily a healthy thing to remain in the closet, that happened because it was a legitimate protective strategy. Yeah. Whereas now there's many young people coming out around 10 because maybe their family's supportive, so they think, well, it's fine, like I'll be accepted and embraced, and that's a good thing, and they feel safe enough to come out. But then in navigating the world more broadly are now exposed to being targets of that hostility at a much younger developmental age.
Or there's some like age-related responses to that where it's like, you're too young to know this yet, even though we're accepting of the adults or of older people. You know, there's so much, again, complexity about how that might be responded to. And then, again, some of the like expectations, and then sometimes leading into power and control dynamics in a family that can result from that.
I'm keen to know a bit more about as well, you know, how young people, you know, who have grown up in these sort of family violence contexts, what that might look like as they go into their first relationships, you know, as an adult, and their first, you know, intimate relationships. Marcus, would you like to share a bit about that?
There's a couple of things that come to mind. So one is more broadly, because you're navigating that, what does it mean to exist outside of what I'm presented as being the norm, means you need to find your way into spaces where you become the norm. So this is why queer spaces exist. This is why it's so important to provide them. And I think that is the difficulty when entering into your first like intimate partner relationship, is that might be the first actual queer space you get to be in. And how do you navigate that in a way that you don't try and contort yourself to expectations of people who may or themselves have a lot to learn? And how do you make sure that you're not demanding other people are contorting themselves to meet your needs, which perhaps you need to learn better ways of managing it?
Yeah, and I think that comes back to, you know, these ideas of norms, right? It's sort of operating outside of what you've seen as being normal. You know, normal by being, you know, having to be cisgendered or heterosexual. But then if you're seeing, you know, unhealthy or abusive relationships as normal as well, trying to sort of move beyond that, it is difficult, and those vulnerabilities can be really hard to sort of, you know, learn how to have healthy relationships. Dani, do you have any more examples about what those vulnerabilities might look like going into a new relationship after having that experience?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose there can be quite a lot of isolation, like we were talking about. It can be the case generally for queer young people sort of coming out into independence, and that first intimate relationship might be it, and that isolation in itself could become a vulnerability, and then you know, if then some of those power and control dynamics come into play, then we are more vulnerable, and that is a part. If they're maintaining that isolation and forcing that upon you, then that does become part of those abusive dynamics. So preventing you from sometimes it's about disclosure about our identities that we're being forced to not disclose or forced to disclose in ways that aren't our choices and our autonomous kind of decisions. It doesn't mean we don't consider each other's needs and stuff in a relationship and maybe have to come to some compromises. But if there's a real no, you're being forced to do something you wouldn't feel comfortable doing without that force and control, then that is not a healthy relationship dynamic. So those sorts of things. I mean, alcohol and other drug issues can play into it if you're being pressured into drug and alcohol use that you wouldn't want to be doing, and how that plays into your daily life or your sex life or any other things. Those are forms that can be, becoming, that is sort of power and control over people that can be using things like that. I'm trying to think of other examples. I mean, I just suppose actual homophobia and transphobia can be present even in queer relationships, you know, and the nuance of that depending on the individuals and their identities and the dynamics of that. Biphobia can be common if that you're in a same gender relationship. There can be some biphobia that can be quite an unhealthy dynamic that is between those two people potentially. I think there's so many. That's the ones I can think of.
And that's where, you know, like we're saying, sort of all of these things that you learn at the age where you are learning everything, they do stick. You know, if you're learning sort of homophobia, or if you're seeing unhealthy relationships in the home or friends, those are things that you hold. And sometimes, even if you realize it or not, for a lot of people that can lead to perpetuating similar things later in life. And so things like internalized homophobia, like you said, I think is a very common thing. And so that's, I guess, where it's important, you know, to learn about how to identify where that cycle of violence can sort of be, and ways in which we can sort of stop that perpetration later on. Again, not to say that everyone who has experienced some kind of family violence or unhealthy relationship at an early age will perpetrate violence. We are not sort of saying that, but it is the unfortunate reality, and as shown in a lot of the research, that it does happen. And so ways that we can sort of help support young people to have healthy relationships, support parents to create healthy family dynamics where gender and sexuality and being queer is accepted and really genuinely validated.
I think a real undercurrent here that I keep hearing through it all is like how our mental health is such a big foundational part of this. And, you know, if we've learnt even emotionally abusive kind of dynamics in a family environment, or even just the oppression of being queer itself that society kind of inflicts on us to a degree anyway, our self-talk can be quite oppressive and you know, that again can really play into some of these sorts of intimate partner dynamics, you know, and then that might be perpetuated by the same sorts of messages coming from that partner, and that feeds into that sort of power and control loop. But we might be doing that to ourselves as well, you know, in how we're talking to ourselves in our internal discourse for our mental health, and that's such a learned thing. And I think that's again where those patterns can kind of follow us a bit in our lifetimes and make us and potentially more vulnerable to intimate partner violence as a result. If we've not learned other ways of being, you know, celebrating and strong and the right to feel safe and in ourselves throughout our life in a variety of ways, whether it's from that family environment if it was abusive, or from, like I said, those sort of societal influences about who we are, then it does really kind of take us down a not so great pathway potentially. You know?
And that's where, you know, these concepts of, you know, family and domestic violence, just to scaffold this a bit more as well, is, you know, obviously, you know, for young people, you know, leaving the home, especially leaving the home after being in sort of, or if they're leaving the home because their situations were violent or abusive, that sort of period there may be like between 18 to 25 as sort of a young adult, identity exploration, trying to figure out who you are, especially if figuring out who you are wasn't easy based on the environment that you were in, that, you know, those things lead to more, you know, as research has shown, more like possibly reckless behaviors or being in more unhealthy situations. So I guess, Dani, I'm keen to hear a bit from you about, you know, what pathways you tend to see, you know, for LGBTQI plus young people, you know, when that does happen. You know, it might look things like, you know, leaving home, you know, housing instability, their mental health might be impacted, all those things. But yeah, in your line of work, I'm keen to hear about sort of what you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously working in a homelessness service, we're working with people once they are actually feeling unsafe or like their home environment isn't a healthy place to be, or where they have actively been rejected from the family home and told that they can't live there for who they are. It is more common that it's that more sort of covert one where a young person does not feel comfortable for some of the things that you're saying that they're hearing as indications from their family members, and that might not just be the parents. There could be older siblings or any number of other, or extended family that are sort of have that sort of influence on their family environment that make them feel like they cannot be themselves in that environment, and it is of detriment to their mental health and well-being overall, and often making them feel very isolated, and can be leading to things like suicidality and things like that because of the hopelessness that comes with those sorts of circumstances. So it is a difficult housing and homelessness crisis out there. So a lot of the time people start by couch surfing with friends. If they have friends who have accepting and supportive parents, that's a really common place that people will go, and probably more available than the homelessness services out there, because there is so much demand on services. Not to say they don't exist, and we do house people, but there is so much less available in the sort of homelessness services sector than what there is the demand for all young people, but including the overrepresented LGBTQA plus cohort, and that's why we have our intentional focus at Pickies to have at least 50% of our young people that receive our services being LGBTQA plus, and a third of the total being trans and gender diverse, because we definitely see more kind of lack of understanding and rejection and maybe conditions around them being who they are, or being their authentic self, and whether or not that's acceptable or safe or in the family home.
Really important work that you are doing at Pickies. And as you said, and as you're seeing, and the research does show that a lot of LGBTQA plus people, a lot of young people who are homeless are LGBTQA plus because of, these unhealthy family dynamics in the home, where unfortunately for some young people who are queer, it's safer to not be in the home that they grew up in. And that's a really difficult thing to accept. And that's why the services that you are providing are really important. So it's great that you are.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. And I mean, there's never enough out there, and that's where it is so wonderful when a young person does have a safe friends, family, because, that might be a safer and more stable and more emotionally secure kind of place for them than any other options, even services, which is such an unknown and such a, abrupt start to independence, when you feel like you've got no choice to be safe and healthy other than to kind of cast yourself out into the world as an independent minor or young person. So having supportive other adults in young people's network is so important, whether that's an uncle or an auntie or a friend's parents or whoever else in people's lives. That can be really actually life-saving.
Yeah. So I'm keen to know a bit about, how do these things like cisnormativity and heteronormativity, and expectations about, who a child, should be, in quotations, how do they show up in the ways that families respond to young people, with diverse genders or sexuality?
I'm not sure I'm going to give a direct answer to that, but I'll speak to some themes that I'm hoping at least address it in its essence. I think earlier when I said this task of growing up as a young queer person is recognising that the norm is not you, you are not the norm. It means that you are having to find out what is the norm, how am I different to that, what does this norm now mean for me? And that's going to show up in media, it's going to show up in schools, but it's going to show up in your family relationships. I think the other thing to keep in mind that this process of growing up through adolescence and youth is also gradually coming to terms with the fact that your parent is not the omnipotent superhero that you probably believe in to be as a child, or even supervillain, if that may have been the case. You're kind of learning that they're just very ordinary people who are also at night in bed having all the same insecure thoughts running through their heads about themselves as what you are as a young person.
Yeah.
And so I say that because, it does mean that your parents and carers will be acting out all of those social norms that they've been raised in.
Yeah.
Sometimes, and sometimes that means that they're acting out quite hostile ideas.
Yeah.
I think if your parent or carer is very explicitly making homophobic, transphobic statements, and being quite clearly hateful, that's very clear what's going on. There's no respect coming to you from your parent. That's what's happening. The relationship is one that just lacks basic respect, and they're not engaging with you in a way that's conveying care and dignity.
Yeah.
What's more confusing is when you are in a relationship where you know your parent loves you and cares about you, but they're either expressing views more generally. You know, they may not realize they're talking about you, but they're making comments in response to something that comes on the radio or the news or something, and they're just making a comment. And it might not even be a thoughtful one. It might not even necessarily be a comment that is genuinely their considered principled stance. But for whatever reason in that moment, they mouth off, and it's a negative comment about queer people, or maybe a negative comment about a queer famous person.
Yeah.
And as a young person, you hear that.
Yeah.
And like, okay, if you've just sighed or rolled your eyes or something because it was announced that this singer has come out as non-binary, and you're treating that with disdain or as something that's completely irrelevant and silly, then as a young person, you're going to go, well, that's how they're going to respond to me.
Yeah.
That starts informing your own sense of who you are.
Yeah.
Because you then have to think, well, if that's what I'm going to have to contend with, how do I navigate that? Do I come out and say who I am at the risk of losing someone I love and who I know loves me? That's really scary. What does that mean to not be loved by the person who holds me to be the most important person in their life? Like there's no one else in this world that cares for me as much as this person, and they're going to be dismissive of my identity and who I am.
Yeah.
Like that can be really diminishing. Or you might go, well, either that's too scary, or maybe that's the right way to look at this. Maybe I should be equally dismissive of my own identity. Maybe it doesn't matter. That's being silly. Like that's nothing important. So just forget about it. Like just keep being the normal thing, which is cis straight. Like just do that, because that's either what's right or morally right or whatever it might be. So
or easier.
Yeah, or just easier.
Or less burdens.
That's it.
Safer.
Yeah. And so you can then start contorting your own idea of yourself in order to be this other person in the relationship. And it's not that that person isn't you. It's just that it's not honestly and authentically like really, really you. It's this version that gets created, and that's so difficult because that can happen for long enough that you actually come to believe it yourself. Yeah. And I think this is one of the things we're talking about this in youth and all the difficulties of trying to figure out who you are as a young person, because as we enter adulthood, there does come something of we resolve this. We come to some resolution of who we are, what the world is, and a relationship into it. But it does not mean that idea that you've concluded with in adulthood actually lasts forever. It's just like it gives you something that feels stable to start navigating your life. But you may well find that at 40, this story that you presented to other people about yourself is has reached its limits. It's no longer fulfilling. It actually no longer feels real or authentic, and which is why we have people coming out in middle life. It's not because they didn't know their sexuality or gender identity before. It's just I can no longer exist in the world in the way that I resolved to at 20.
Yeah. And I think that's where, coming back to sort of, these ideas of, expectations about who I should be, that certainly is relevant to my own experience. I growing up, and I realized I was gay, I think around 13. So there was like you were saying, there's all these sorts of signs in the home, or things that, my parents might say now, they probably wouldn't even, realized it at the time, but sort of being really dismissive of gay people, or they might say, oh, that's gay, or sort of just being sort of, and growing up in the regions as well, that's sort of such a normalized homophobia, and that can come up in a lot of family contexts, particularly in the regions. In my case, I was very fortunate that my parents, were accepting, and I had that really positive experience coming out. But we do know for a lot of queer young people that isn't the case. You know, for a lot of young people, you know, these family dynamics like escalate or they sort of break down. We know that sort of unhealthy environments and sometimes these ideas of power and abuse, whether it be, you know, it's not necessarily physical, they can still be quite harmful to the spaces they create in the home. They're still happening even if parents are meaning to or not, because it is really inherently hard to come out as a queer young person. So I think that it's important to sort of, because we can think objectively, you know, physical abuse is not good. Overt emotional abuse is really bad. These sorts of like stereotypical ways of looking at family violence, we know that those are things we need to address in other ways. But I think that unintentional, unhealthy dynamics are really important to target as well.
Adolescence, the stage of youth, is a real anxiety-inducing period for parents and carers.
Yeah.
Because up until then, the legal responsibility and just the dependency of that relationship has meant that the parent and guardian has held all responsibility to live up to making decisions in the interests of the young person and intervening when a child is doing the wrong thing and doing something that's harmful to them.
Yeah.
So that's difficult because, look, at some point you go, yep, they'll be adults and they'll be able to make their own decisions. But that isn't a clear moment where a switch is flicked. Yeah. So it isn't actually clear in that role of caring for young people. Yeah. What is this asking of me? Is this a time where I have to give space for them to just be autonomous and make their own decisions even if they fail? Or is this one of those times where I need to step in to make sure that they are safe and protect them from themselves? It's just not always clear.
Yeah.
That is added difficulty, I think, when it comes to caring for queer young people. Yeah. Because now they're not just navigating adult life, they're potentially navigating an aspect of life that you as a parent and carer have no insight into.
Or potentially you have insight from really conservative discourses where you are afraid of the trans trending and you're afraid of, you feel a responsibility to protect your child from not being brainwashed, and some of those discourses that are obviously really problematic, but might be a genuine thing a parent is trying to care about their child for, but then if they're following those sorts of discourses and thinking patterns, then they could be putting in really power and control things in place to prevent a child that is, needing to figure themselves out in a free and safe way. And so they do tell them not to tell other people about who they are and their identity. So that sort of like control over that autonomy to come out in your own time. Or on the flip side, tell people without your consent to disclose that you've come out to that parent and that sort of thing. And obviously that in itself wouldn't necessarily just be considered a kind of violence. But when you're exerting those power and control over how somebody can navigate that for themselves, it does start to slide into that area of unhealthy power and control dynamics.
When things are overtly, on the more abusive side of things, those are, easier to recognize. When they're on the sort of more power, sort of coercive control side of things, they're a little bit harder to identify. And so I think when we're sort of speaking about what that family violence looks like in the family context, and particularly from parents and guardians, when you're already sort of having that role as the parental figure, there's already inherent power that comes with that. But I think it's really important that we identify how tricky it is and complicated it is to have these discussions around parents who are just trying to parent. And I love you, you're my child, all of that. But if there is that inherent misunderstanding about being LGBTQA+, that can be used in sort of power.
And if you're a carer sort of feeling insecure about what am I meant to offer this young person, what am I meant to do? And all your friends and family around you are kind of saying you need to stop them affirming their gender identity. That's the safe thing. And you've then got prime ministers and presidents and things around the world who are also saying this. If you're in a point of like, this is something I just don't know anything about, that's very hard to think, no, I'm confident enough that I can judge this right on my own thoughts.
I guess it's around this idea that we're talking about where in a lot of families, so coming out as a young person is incredibly difficult, even when parents or guardians might be accepting, right? And I can speak a bit more to my experience there, but before I do that, I sort of want to like hear from both of you around this really complicated idea of the dynamics that are created in the home, possibly unintentionally, by parents who might be accepting, and that really tricky line of creating these sort of possible unhealthy dynamics for a young person that don't feel like they can come out. And so I guess thinking a bit about like what parents possibly could do, what parents or guardians could do to sort of create more safer environments in the home to foster more inclusion and young people feeling safe to sort of express themselves.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is do the work yourself as a parent, and I think that has a whole bunch of elements and layers to that. So one, in your own well-being and self-care so that you're in the best place to be responding and being the best parent you can be. But then what that needs to look like is that we do need to question what are our assumptions and expectations for what we hope for our kid, and how we maybe even a bit insidiously kind of conveying those to our kids so that they might be getting messages that it wouldn't be as preferable, even out of concern for safety or something, it wouldn't be as preferable or as easy to accept if somebody did come out, if my kid did come out to me, you know, those sorts of things. I think that's a real groundwork that needs to kind of be the starting stuff.
I think in responding to that, for me, we're not just speaking to parents. I think we're talking to really adults in the families and lives of young people in general. And I say that because I don't think there's enough emphasis and importance placed on the need for multiple role models to be playing a part in the lives of young people.
Yeah.
And whenever giving anything in the way it's asked of advice for parents, I think the thing that I also just want to set up is parents need to understand, and we need to understand, that parenting is a task of doing something that is well beyond the time, energy, knowledge, expertise, skill level of the individual doing it. So it means you are always doing something that feels a bit beyond your own personal capacity. That means come to terms with the fact that you're not going to do it 100% right. Just recognize that you're going to make mistakes, you're going to fall short, there's going to be gaps, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you're causing harm. It doesn't mean that you don't love your child. And if we can just be okay with that and establish that with young people as well, that makes it possible for young people to tell you when you're getting it wrong. If we're saying that this is already a difficult experience for LGBTIQA young people to be navigating because there's not the models and information around them for their experience, well, that's the same for non-queer parents. So you're still learning as well.
Yeah.
What you want to do in conveying that acceptance is to then really make it okay to be in conversation with each other as adult and child or young person. And it's in that space that not only do you get to learn what the support needs are and be invited to offer it, but you are also making it okay for a young person to identify their needs, to be able to communicate that, and to expect that you will genuinely be making every effort to meet those needs, even if it's uncomfortable and difficult for you. That's fantastic for your relationship and creating a safe and accepting environment within the family. But that's also just demonstrating to this young person, this is how healthy relationships should work. Okay? And if your child or young person says something to you that you find challenging, which your own norms and assumptions are probably going to be challenged, that's part of what's playing out here. You are looking for a way to speak to that without placing judgment or responsibility on the young person. It's like, just own it. Go, I've got something that I need to give more thought to or work through. And then go, like when it comes to education and support and try and understand it, you go find that somewhere else as the adult.
So just to finish up, the podcast today, I'm keen to hear from both of you a bit about, the services you provide and how you can, and how, you are supporting queer young people who are, possibly experiencing family violence or unhealthy relationships. Marcus?
Yeah, well, look, I work at Freedom, which people might better know as Freedom Centre, because for about 30 years it's been running a LGBT youth drop-in space here in Perth. But we also are now providing counselling support, and there's some community development support available as well. Mm-hmm. So look, that is a place that if you are a queer young person, if you live in Perth, you can go. Okay, get on the Freedom website and onto, I think Instagram is the main socials that they use to update the information. You can turn up to those drop-in activities. There's some for over 18s, some for under 18s. There's also running drop-in on Discord online. So actually, if you live anywhere around the Perth metro area or across the state, you're able to access that online as well.
Yeah.
And if you're needing counselling, yes, we run a counselling service, and again, we see people face-to-face in Perth, but that's available to people right across Western Australia. So look, no matter how remote you live, even if you don't have a strong internet connection, like, we can figure something out of either just phone calls or make use of your school and their internet or something. We can come to some arrangement to be able to provide that support. And I think for families as well, if you're sort of supporting queer young people in your family, getting young people to Freedom is a very strong starting point to connecting them with community.
Yeah. And absolutely. Freedom are doing incredible things, always have. So it's really great for you to be offering these services. So thank you, Marcus. Dani?
Yeah, so Pickies, or Perth Inner City Youth Service, we have a drop-in centre, so 3 days a week from 10 till 1 that's open. All the information's on our website for being able to connect to us in a kind of pretty low-key, friendly way. But obviously, if you're experiencing homelessness, there's key kind of lines like Entry Point that can help with referrals to a range of homelessness services, and lots of youth homelessness services are really great at being quite inclusive. But yeah, I suppose Pickies prides ourselves as that being one of the things we've really done for a long time, and been, I suppose, a bit ahead of maybe the general youth sector in that sense. And yeah, we, like I said, have that intentional focus where we have at least 50% of our young people who are 50% of the young people that we support are LGBTIQ. So we really have that prioritisation for this population, so that we can, and we have lots of peer-friendly workers and things. But we do have transitional housing. We also have just youth workers that can support people to help to navigate the housing and homelessness circumstances they might be dealing with, as well as mental health and other health and wellbeing services as they need to have that sort of individualised support too.
Yeah, fantastic. And of course, you can access the Pride and Respect website as well, and access the specialist services that we have for Pride and Respect. Thank you both, Marcus and Dani, for being here today. It was a really great conversation. Thank you for joining. Thank you.
If anything in this episode has raised concerns for you, support is available. If you're in immediate danger, call 000. For 24/7 FDV counselling and support, you can contact 1-800-RESPECT on 1-800-737-732. LGBTIQA+ specialist FDV support is also available through the Rainbow Sexual, Domestic and Family Violence Helpline on 1-800-497-212. In Western Australia, you can contact the Pride and Respect Specialist FDV Support Service on 0481 080 201. Thanks for listening to another episode of Pride and Respect, a community partnership between Living Proud, Grey, Transfolk WA and WAAC, generously funded by the Department of Communities. If this conversation was meaningful to you, please subscribe or share with others. To get more information, leave feedback or access the show notes, visit prideandrespect.org.au.